Dr. Smith held the test results, his expression tinged with concern.
Congratulations, Alice, you are 4.5 weeks pregnant. Serious, be careful with your activities with your husband, don't disturb the pregnancy.
Emily listened to Dr. Smith in a daze, covering her lower abdomen. She was pregnant. Leaving the hospital, Emily was about to call Henry to share the good news when a man who looked like a bodyguard blocked her path.
Miss Alice, the master wants to see you.
The master he referred to was Henry's father, John.
Is there something?
Before Emily could finish her sentence, the bodyguard grabbed her arm and shoved her into a nearby car. John sat there steadily, his expression arrogant and disdainful.
You're pregnant? End it.
Why?
Have you forgotten about the toxins in your body?
Emily froze, recalling the events from 2 months ago. That rainy night, John had found her, thrown $5 million at her along with a contract, and said,
Henry has been poisoned. The only way to transfer the toxins is through a woman. If you're willing to take the toxins into your own body and sign this contract to never see Henry again, the $5 million will be enough to get your father out of the gambling den.
Her current body indeed couldn't bear a healthy child.
Be sensible. That night, you signed the contract to never see Henry again. Now that you're still by his side, you're already in breach.
I understand.
Standing outside the termination room, Emily still hadn't fully processed everything.
Emily, it's your turn.
Okay.
Emily stood up, took a deep breath, touched her lower abdomen one last time, and lay down on the operating table. Suddenly, the door to the operating room was kicked open.
Emily, so you came to the hospital for this.
Henry stormed into the operating room, pushing aside the doctor and nurse, grabbing Emily's arm and dragging her off the table.
Did I give you permission to make this decision?
Henry threw her harshly onto the floor.
I won't allow you to end the pregnancy.
Henry, what if I told you that I had no choice when I took the money and left you?
She looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow.
No choice? I heard every word you said when you took that $5 million.
Those words were indeed spoken by her. Emily was confined in the villa by Henry. He hired the best butler and nutritionist to take care of her and the baby. Just as Emily was at a loss on how to escape, John's call came through.
Be ready, I'll send you away tomorrow.
With that, John hung up the phone. Emily curled up on the bed, clutching her stomach, enduring the bitterness of the long night. In a daze, she suddenly heard the bedroom door being forcefully opened. A drunken Henry stumbled in.
Henry!
Emily hadn't even sat up when Henry pressed her down.
Why are you leaving me?
Henry was truly drunk, his eyes bloodshot, and suppressed emotions roiled within them. Emily glanced at him and felt overwhelmed.
Do you love money that much?
Henry's emotions spiraled out of control. He gripped Emily's chin tightly, his voice hoarse and harsh.
Am I not rich enough? You gave up on me for $5 million. Get out. Emily, get out. Leave now.
Emily's eyes stung with tears as she curled up on the bed, unable to move. This was their last night together, and she didn't want it to end this way.
I'm not leaving.
Emily stubbornly clung to Henry's waist, her tears soaking her eyelashes and half her face. The commotion alarmed the household staff and the butler.
Sir, please calm down. Miss Alice is still carrying a child.
Henry's actions paused slightly, his expression darkening.
The child.
Emily quickly grabbed his hand.
Henry.
Henry shook her off, glaring at Emily with intense hatred.
The only value you have now is the child in your womb.
With that, he left without another glance at Emily. The long night passed, and Emily didn't know how she got through it. At dawn, she tidied up the bedroom. Looking in the mirror, she suddenly noticed that her neck and chin were badly bruised, as if she had been severely beaten. It wasn't clear whether these marks were left by Henry or if they were caused by the hidden toxins in her body. Emily tightly gripped the edge of the sink, her face pale. Her lower abdomen began to ache faintly. She held her belly, feeling her whole body grow cold and heavy. Half an hour later, the butler was sent away, and an inside maid helped Emily escape from the house. Once in the car, she was taken directly to the hospital. John had already arranged everything. As soon as Emily arrived at the hospital, she was taken for a procedure. After intense pain, the child was removed from Emily's body. She stared blankly at the ceiling, feeling as if a part of her soul had been cut away in that instant.
Not good. The patient is experiencing severe bleeding. Quick, get blood from the blood bank.
The nurse hurriedly opened the door and ran out, only to bump into a tall, imposing figure.
Emily, how dare you?
This woman had secretly terminated the pregnancy.
Emily, say something!
Henry stormed over, looking as if he wanted to tear her apart on the spot.
What are you doing, sir? The patient is in critical condition. You need to leave, or there will be serious consequences.
Henry's frantic actions finally ceased. Seeing the continuous flow of blood from Emily's lower body and her completely bloodless face, he was momentarily stunned. Beep beep. The life monitor suddenly showed a sharp decline in her vital signs.
Where's the blood? Hurry up and bring the blood bags.
The doctor pushed Henry aside.
You need to leave now. We need to save her.
Henry was pushed out of the operating room, dazed. Staring at the tightly closed door, he finally came to his senses. After a round of emergency treatment, Emily's condition stabilized. When Emily was wheeled out of the operating room and into a regular ward, it was already late at night. Henry sat by the bed, staring at Emily's pale face, his eyes filled with suppressed emotions. He truly couldn't understand this woman. Click, the hospital room door was pushed open by Dr. Smith.
Are you Alice's husband?
What's the matter?
Well, opening a medical report, I just received Alice's detailed examination results and found that her blood.
At that moment, another voice interrupted.
Sir, the master wants you to return immediately. He has something urgent to discuss with you. The master said it's extremely urgent.
Henry eventually nodded and followed the bodyguard back to the family estate. But the so-called urgent matter John had was to introduce Henry to a potential fiancé.
Father, if you called me back for something this trivial, then I won't stay.
After he left, an old butler approached John and whispered.
Our plan to take Alice away failed. The young master is watching her too closely. We can't make a move.
He leaned in and whispered more advice into John's ear. Emily slept for 2 days before finally waking up. The loss and significant blood loss left her extremely weak, and she stayed in the hospital for a week. When she was discharged, the bruises on her chin and neck were still visible. For some reason, Emily's skin had become particularly prone to bruising, leaving terrifying marks with even the slightest bump. After being discharged, Henry took her back to the villa. But this time, Henry never returned, ignoring her as if he had truly forgotten her. Henry confined her at home, forbidding any contact with the outside world and not allowing her to step outside. She had no way to escape. Until John's men came to take her out for the second time. This time, she saw John in the car.
Is the poison in your body acting up?
When will you arrange for me to leave here?
You don't need to leave. Even if you do, Henry will find a way to bring you back. It's better to make him give up completely.
How do I make him give up?
John pulled out a document and threw it at Emily, commanding without emotion.
Sign it.
It was a contract of sale. 1 million, selling herself to marry a man named Charles. She knew him, they were former classmates who lost touch after graduation.
Hurry up and sign it. Don't waste time. From now on, remember, the only man you love is Charles. From the time you were classmates, you only loved him. Understand?
I'll sign. I'll sign.
Before getting out of the car, John handed Emily 2 pills.
Take them, and then accompany Mr. Charles properly.
Emily instantly understood what the pills were for, but the thought of being touched by someone other than Henry filled her with revulsion. John noticed her reluctance and signaled to his men. They immediately stepped forward, held Emily down, and forced the pills into her mouth, making her swallow them. The car door opened, and Emily was pushed out.
Emily.
A gentle, unfamiliar voice called from behind. A tall figure in a clean, white shirt, with gentle eyes and an elegant demeanor, somewhat resembled the refined young man she remembered.
Charles?
It's me. Smiles warmly. You still recognize me.
After all, we were classmates.
Before she could finish, her body suddenly heated up, and her legs gave way, causing her to collapse.
Emily!
Charles hurriedly carried Emily into the bedroom.
Are you feeling unwell?
Emily opened her eyes groggily, her vision blurred. She seemed to see Henry's silhouette.
Henry, hold me.
It's me. Charles.
I'll take you for a cold shower. He carried Emily to the bathroom and gave her a cold bath. The cold water gradually brought Emily back to her senses. After soaking for half an hour, until the effects of the medication had completely worn off, Emily finally got out of the bathtub. As she changed into the clean clothes Charles had prepared, she suddenly noticed more bruises on her body, likely from when Charles had carried her. Charles was still there. Seeing Emily come out, he smiled gently.
You must be very tired now. I won't disturb you. Get some rest.
He turned to leave.
Wait, why did you spend 10 million to buy me?
Charles paused, his eyes dark as he looked at Emily.
Don't you understand yet? Emily, I've liked you since college. But your heart has always belonged to Henry. I didn't want to interfere, so I stepped back. But now I hear you've broken up, and Henry has a fiancée.
He has a fiancée?
Emily was stunned, her heart feeling as if it had been gripped tightly, unable to beat.
You didn't know?
Sorry, I'm very tired now. Can you leave?
All right, get some rest. Call me if you need anything.
After he left, Emily collapsed onto the sofa, covering her face in pain. Emily curled up on the sofa for half the night, her head growing heavy. She drifted into a fitful sleep. Half awake, she suddenly heard a loud bang as the door was kicked open.
Emily, how dare you run?
Emily stared dumbfounded at the man who barged in, her eyes wide with disbelief. She hadn't been gone long, and he had already found her.
Come back with me.
He dragged her out. Charles rushed over at that moment.
Henry, what are you doing? Let her go.
Charles tried to rescue Emily, but Henry punched him to the ground.
Stay out of this.
Henry dragged Emily to the staircase. Emily clung to the railing, holding back tears.
Henry, you can't separate me and Charles. I love him.
The last few words took all of Emily's strength. Henry's body stiffened, his gaze sharp as a knife.
You love him?
Emily closed her eyes tightly, nodding with great effort.
Yes.
Henry suddenly grabbed her by the neck, pulling her close, staring into her eyes.
Say it again.
Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with sorrow, unable to utter a word.
I said, I love.
Shut up.
Henry threw Emily aside. She fell to her knees at his feet with a thud.
My father told me you were willing to sell yourself for 10 million. I didn't believe it.
His eyes were downcast, his face cold and expressionless, his voice hoarse and desolate. Emily clenched her fists, taking a deep breath to regain her strength.
It's not because of the 10 million. I liked him since college. I pursued you because your silhouette reminded me of him. That's all.
Henry fell silent, not saying a word for a long time.
You love money, and you love Charles, right? Let's see how much you love him when he has nothing left.
With that, he turned away from Emily and left. The news of Henry's engagement was all over the newspapers the next day. The woman was Sophia, a noble lady from a prestigious family. That night, Emily developed a severe fever and was rushed to the hospital. After 3 days of fluctuating illness, her condition finally stabilized. Her severe fever turned into a mild one, but her medical examination results were unexpected.
From the blood test results, your platelet and white blood cell counts are very low. This means your body's immunity, self-healing ability, and blood clotting capacity are also very low. We've never encountered such a case before. We recommend you go abroad for a detailed examination.
After Dr. Smith left the room, Charles immediately suggested,
Emily, come abroad with me for treatment.
Emily shook her head and withdrew her hand from Charles's grasp.
I won't go abroad with you. Don't worry about me. I want to go back to the countryside.
In your current condition, how can you go to the countryside?
Emily lowered her eyelashes, her pale face showing indifference.
Charles, my life or death has nothing to do with you. Don't worry about me.
She genuinely didn't want to drag the innocent Charles into her troubles.
Emily, you're tired. Rest for now. I'll come back to see you later.
With that, he left the room. She didn't want to trouble anyone now. But Charles continued to care for her. After her fever subsided, he took her back to the villa and personally looked after her recovery. The more he did this, the more determined Emily was to leave. Once she regained enough strength to walk, Emily packed her things and prepared to leave quietly. Late at night, the villa was silent.
I know the company is in big trouble now. We can't fight Henry. Sell the company before it goes bankrupt.
Emily's steps froze as she listened. In just a few days, Charles's company was in such dire straits that it had to be sold.
Let's leave it at that for now.
Charles hung up the phone. Emily didn't dare to listen any longer. She hurried down the stairs and quietly left Charles's villa. Could she still plead with Henry to show mercy? She was going to die anyway, she couldn't let Charles be ruined along with her. Emily took a taxi to Henry's villa.
Sorry, Alice. Both the young master and young mistress have instructed that if we see you, you are not allowed to step into the villa.
Young mistress. The person the guard referred to must be Sophia. Just as Emily was about to ask, she saw Henry's figure out of the corner of her eye. He had his arm around Sophia's waist, and they were chatting intimately on the balcony.
Who is that woman standing at the gate?
Henry's gaze followed hers.
I don't know her.
The cold words were clear to Emily.
Get that woman out of here.
Two servants quickly followed orders and escorted Emily out.
I want to see Henry.
Sorry, Alice, you heard what the young master said.
The servants still dragged Emily out, leaving her in the cold wind as the dark sky suddenly poured down rain. Emily was left outside, not allowed near the door, with no shelter from the rain. She stood there, drenched, all night. She just wanted to plead with Henry to spare Charles. Her head began to feel dizzy. She touched her forehead and realized she had a fever. The dizziness grew stronger, and Emily finally collapsed at the door.
Alice.
A servant, remembering past kindness, brought her inside. Seeing the blood continuously flowing from her knee and the stained floor, the servants panicked and immediately called Henry.
Young master, Alice has fainted. She seems seriously ill, her knee is injured, and there's a lot of blood, and…
Did I give you permission to bring her into my house?
After much hesitation, the servant finally called for an ambulance and sent Emily to the hospital. Meanwhile, Henry hung up the phone, his expression dark and terrifying.
Henry, do you like this wedding dress?
Sophia asked, wearing a backless mermaid gown.
It's okay.
Sophia's eyes briefly flashed with displeasure, but she didn't show it.
I'll go try another one.
Henry, holding his phone, couldn't stop thinking about that woman. Half an hour later, he couldn't sit still any longer. He stood up and rushed out. Driving at breakneck speed, he returned to the villa but didn't see Emily. At that moment, the news on the TV caught his attention.
A severe multi-vehicle accident just occurred. An ambulance was severely damaged, resulting in the immediate passing of a nurse and critically injuring a patient inside.
The screen switched to the accident scene, where a medical stretcher quickly passed by, carrying a bloodied, slender figure. That person was Emily. Without a moment's hesitation, Henry rushed out. He had to get to the hospital.
Where is Emily's surgery?
Second floor, emergency surgery room.
At the surgery room door, Charles was already there, his face pale with despair.
Henry, what are you doing here?
Charles stood up and angrily punched him in the face.
Is she okay? Is she okay now?
She's not! Henry, you have no idea. Emily is in critical condition. Her blood has undergone severe changes.
What did you say? She's in critical condition?
Henry, you know nothing.
Tell me, what exactly happened to her?
Henry grabbed Charles by the collar.
What illness does she have?
What does it matter if you know? Whether Emily can be saved is still uncertain.
She will be fine. I won't let anything happen to her.
Time ticked by slowly. After what felt like an eternity, the door to the operating room finally opened, but it was a nurse rushing out to get more blood bags.
How is she?
The patient's injuries aren't severe, they're mostly superficial. But she has a problem with blood clotting, so the bleeding won't stop.
The nurse kept going back and forth, carrying blood bags in and out. After another long wait, the door to the operating room finally opened again. A weary Dr. Smith walked out.
How is she?
The patient's condition has just stabilized, but her immune system and liver and kidneys are compromised. I suspect she has been exposed to some toxin that is attacking her immune and detoxification functions.
Is there still hope if we start treatment now?
I can't say for sure, but right now, whether she will wake up is still a question.
Emily was moved to a sterile room because her immune system was too weak. To avoid infection, she had to stay there until her wounds healed. Henry stayed by the door, never taking his eyes off the unconscious woman inside. His concern for Emily made John and Sophia uneasy. After holding out for a few days, Sophia finally came to the hospital.
Our engagement party has been postponed for almost a week. When are we going to reschedule? My friends and family keep asking.
Cancel it.
What did you say? Why? What's wrong with me?
Everything.
Humiliated by Henry, Sophia couldn't stay any longer and stormed out. Fuming, she left the hospital and ran into John at the entrance.
What happened? Why are you so upset?
Ask Henry. Mr. John, it looks like our family's alliance is off.
I'll talk to Henry. Don't worry, I only recognize you as my daughter-in-law.
Sophia didn't respond, clutching her handbag tightly as she walked away. As soon as she left, John's face twisted with anger. He quickly went upstairs to find Henry.
What are you doing? You can't cancel the alliance with the White family. Do you know how much business we stand to gain if you marry Sophia?
Did you poison Emily?
I have no idea what poison you're talking about.
I will find out how Emily was poisoned.
John squinted at the unconscious Emily, his gaze growing even more sinister. 10 minutes later.
Sir, what can I do for you?
Investigate what happened between my father and Emily.
Yes, sir.
Henry gripped his phone tightly, his eyes dark and unreadable. Charles eventually came to the hospital. He couldn't stop worrying about Emily. After changing clothes and undergoing disinfection, a nurse led him to Emily's room.
You fool.
Charles couldn't help but reach out to touch her face, but he stopped just short. Be ready, I'll send you away tomorrow.
Owen hung up the phone with a decisive click.
Emily curled up on the bed, clutching her stomach, enduring the bitterness of the long night. In a daze, she suddenly heard the bedroom door being forcefully opened. A drunken Henry stumbled in.
Henry.
Emily hadn't even sat up when Henry pressed her down. Henry looked irritably at the documents in front of him. He couldn't help but think of Emily. He remembered the happy and sweet times they had long ago. These past few days, his mind had been filled with thoughts of her. The investigators he had sent out had yet to report back. She had clearly said that she had always liked Charles, and that she was with him only because he reminded her of Charles. Yet, he couldn't stop thinking about her.
Do you really not need to pack anything?
No, I don't have much to pack. Narrator, sad, although she had recovered from her car accident injuries, her face was still pale, almost transparent.
All right, let's go.
Meanwhile, at Han Corporation, Henry's phone rang. The voice on the other end was urgent.
Sir, we found out what you asked us to investigate.
Henry listened quietly, his eyes widening with each word. By the end, his hands were trembling. A deathly silence followed. He hurriedly hung up the phone, grabbed his car keys, and rushed out. He had to find her at the hospital. Immediately. Upon arriving at the hospital, he was told that Emily had already recovered and that Charles had completed her discharge paperwork. She had just left. Henry suddenly remembered that she had mentioned a few days ago that she planned to leave with Charles. Henry quickly left the hospital and drove off. His mind was filled with the information his subordinate had reported.
Sir, did you know that you were once poisoned? The poison was administered by your father. Later, your father found Miss Alice and told her that you needed a woman to transfer the poison from your body. Miss Alice agreed, without hesitation. The reason she needed money was because her father was a gambler who owed a lot of debt. Miss Alice never told you. She had always intended to use her own strength to repay her father's debts.
How could he have been so foolish, blinded by such a facade?
Find out where Emily and Charles are, right now.
The subordinate quickly sent the address. Henry discovered that Emily and Charles were heading towards the airport. His mind and heart were filled with thoughts of Emily, to the point where he completely forgot he was driving and had already run several red lights. He didn't hear the honking and cursing around him. Nor did he see the car that suddenly appeared, speeding towards him. Bang! Henry's vision blurred, and the last thing he saw before closing his eyes was a sea of red. John had just learned that Emily had left with Charles. He had just hung up the phone when he received another call.
What's the matter?
Sir, it's bad news. Henry has been in a car accident.
What happened?
Henry found out that Miss Alice was leaving and drove after her. Then,
Which hospital is he in?
John asked urgently as he rushed to the operating room. The red light at the operating room door stung his eyes. After a long and arduous surgery, Henry was finally wheeled out. His face was pale, devoid of any color, and his head was heavily bandaged. The next day, John immediately stepped forward to check, but Dr. Smith blocked him.
Please remain calm. The patient needs rest.
How is he?
The patient has multiple injuries, but the head injury is the most severe. We need to observe further to determine the extent. You should be prepared. The aftereffects could range from memory loss to a more severe condition.
What do you mean, a severe condition?
Please don't get agitated. We can't make a definitive conclusion yet.
Emily and Charles arrived in a small town abroad. Emily couldn't name the town but found its scenery beautiful. A few days later, Henry slowly opened his eyes.
Why am I here?
don't you remember? You were in an accident.
How did the accident happen?
The subordinate's mind raced, realizing it was best not to answer lightly. It would be better to wait for the master to decide. John quickly arrived. When he got there, he saw a circle of doctors and nurses around Henry, conducting checks.
Father.
Rest well.
John nodded and turned to ask Dr. Smith.
How is my son?
His memory is fragmented and confused. To help his memory recover, you could take him to familiar places.
John's eyes flickered. He turned to Henry.
Henry, what don't you remember?
I just don't remember why I'm in the hospital.
You were in an accident. Do you remember why?
No.
Do you remember who your girlfriend is?
Isn't it Sophia from the White family?
John was surprised. It seemed that Henry's memory loss had conveniently erased Emily from his mind. John sat down on the chair by the bed.
Henry, you haven't lost your memory. You're recovering well. Just stay in the hospital a bit longer and you'll be fine.
Yes, I understand, Father. I want to see Emily.
All right, I'll arrange it for you.
As soon as he left the room, he quickly dialed Sophia's number.
Uncle John, what can I do for you?
Sophia, I hope you'll reconsider the marriage alliance.
Uncle, why insist? Your son personally told me he wanted to call off the engagement.
John's eyes brightened.
He had an accident. His body is fine, but he lost his memory. He thinks all his memories with that woman are with you.
Uncle, how can I believe you?
You can come to X hospital and see Henry. He's been asking to see you.
Sophia hesitated for a moment and then agreed.
All right, I'm coming now.
Half an hour later, Sophia arrived at the hospital.
I know you're a smart girl and know how to handle this.
I understand.
Sophia nodded and then turned the doorknob to enter. Henry immediately looked towards the door. Seeing Sophia, he smiled.
Emily, you're here.
How did you end up like this? I was on a business trip a few days ago and just got back.
Thank you for your hard work.
Sophia composed herself and looked at the man on the hospital bed, stepping forward to hold his hand.
It's not hard, as long as you're okay.
John stood aside, watching their intimate interaction with satisfaction, unable to hide the smile on his face. Charles brought Emily to the hospital. Dr. Smith examined her carefully but frowned in silence. The two exchanged a glance, seeing the unease in each other's eyes.
I've never seen such a strange toxin. We currently have no way to treat it, but perhaps we can extend her life through proper care.
Extend her life? How long does she have?
Not more than 6 months. But with proper care, we might be able to extend her life, though it's uncertain how long. But living is always better, right?
Let's proceed with the care. Please help her extend her life as much as possible.
Dr. Smith nodded.
Go handle the admission procedures. It will be more convenient for us to monitor and treat her, and we can respond immediately if any issues arise.
Sophia sat in the chair by the hospital bed, reading a newspaper, while Henry lay on the bed watching her.
Why do you keep looking at me?
She finally couldn't ignore the intense gaze and put down the newspaper to ask him.
You're beautiful. I feel like waking up and seeing you, realizing how beautiful you are.
Wasn't I beautiful before?
Henry was stunned. In his memory, her face was blurry.
Sophia, when I recover and leave the hospital, let's get married, okay?
Okay.
After spending some more time with Henry, she found an excuse to leave. In the hospital room, Henry looked out at the trees, feeling bored. He felt he had been too impulsive just now. Why did he suddenly propose to Sophia? Henry thought of Sophia's blushing face earlier and felt something was off. He shook his head and closed his eyes in frustration. During his hospital stay, Sophia visited him every day, talking to him. He increasingly felt that his interactions with Sophia and his feelings for her were not quite right, but he couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. He kept telling himself it was because of the car accident. The memories were so vivid, yet the face of the person beside him was always blurry. He tried hard to see that person's face clearly, but he never could. Whenever he tried, his head would ache slightly. And his heart too.
Henry?
She called him several times, but he didn't respond.
What's wrong?
You were daydreaming and didn't respond to me.
I was thinking about the past.
Sophia's internal alarm went off.
Really? Did you remember anything?
The face of the person beside me is always blurry. Is that person you? I think it must be you.
Of course, it's me. Who else could it be? Am I so blurry in your mind?
Maybe you can tell me about our past?
The past is in the past.
Precisely because it's in the past, I want to know.
Sophia laughed.
All right, I'll tell you about the old days.
Sophia pursed her lips, unable to refuse, and recounted some stories about her suitors, embellishing them to create those so-called old days. From personality traits to trivial matters, Sophia spoke in great detail. After finishing, she realized she had said too much and quickly covered her mouth, glancing at Henry. She found Henry deep in thought.
Henry? What are you thinking about? Did you remember something?
Although I didn't remember anything, what you said seems new to me, but it's quite interesting. I didn't realize so much had happened between us.
Sophia, looking into Henry's gentle eyes, couldn't help but place her hand over his. She felt his hand suddenly tense.
What's wrong? Are you feeling unwell?
Henry's body relaxed under her touch, and he shook his head with a smile.
No, nothing.
Henry suppressed his inner discomfort, forcing himself to relax. Henry was discharged from the hospital.
Sir, I'm sorry I'm late.
It's fine. Let's go.
Henry shook his head and moved to get in the car.
Sir, are you all right?
I've been discharged. How could I not be all right?
The subordinate didn't know Henry had lost his memory and didn't understand why he had suddenly reconciled with Sophia.
Sir, about Alice.
Alice who? What's wrong with you today?
Hadn't he already told the boss everything? How could this be?
Let's go.
Henry threw out the words and got in the car. The subordinate quickly collected his thoughts and got in the car as well. Emily woke up feeling utterly weak. She tried to get out of bed but found she couldn't move. After a while, she finally regained some sensation, but it was followed by overwhelming pain. She had never experienced such intense pain before. Did this mean she really had no way out? Emily bit her lip tightly, closing her eyes in agony. Charles, carrying a lunchbox in one hand, pushed open the hospital room door with the other, only to hear muffled groans from inside. Alarm bells rang in his head, and he immediately pushed the door open, finding Emily curled up on the bed, groaning in pain.
Emily, are you all right? Is it very painful? You must hold on.
Dr. Smith and the nurses rushed in. Dr. Smith quickly examined her, his expression turning serious.
Prepare for surgery.
Emily was swiftly wheeled into the operating room, and soon the red light outside the door lit up. The red light was glaring. Although it was just an engagement party, it was for the most prestigious families in the area, the Liu Anden families. John had sent out numerous invitations, so the guests were countless. John mingled among the crowd, exchanging pleasantries, his face glowing with happiness. A subordinate whispered something in John's ear, and John smiled, addressing the guests.
Today's main event isn't about me. My son and the young lady from the Bai family are ready. Let's start the engagement party. Ladies and gentlemen, Thank you all for coming to my son's engagement party with Miss Bai.
After a round of polite words, the guests smiled and applauded.
Now, let's welcome Miss Bai.
John's voice was loud and clear. He raised his hand, and the door opened. Sophia, like a proud swan, gracefully walked in. John stood between the two, smiling as he clasped their hands together, looking satisfied only when he saw the rings on their fingers. The clinking of glasses and graceful dance steps filled the room. When Emily woke up again, it was already night.
Emily?
Malie quickly turned her head.
Charles.
You're awake? Are you still in pain? How do you feel?
Charles turned on the dim bedside lamp, and Emily quickly adjusted to the light, smiling at him.
I'm fine.
Emily, let's get married.
Emily looked at his hand on hers, then at his eyes, seeing the sincerity in them.
Are you crazy?
I want to give you a home.
He wanted to protect her openly and rightfully.
Charles, in my current state, I can't give you anything. I am all ready.
No, you're not. You'll always be my Emily.
Emily stared blankly at the white ceiling. That night, Charles had suddenly proposed, saying he wanted to give her a home. He later said he would wait for her answer, that he would wait forever. She wasn't worth it, not worth him treating her like this. Something felt off. Henry couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong these days, but he couldn't pinpoint what it was. His gaze fell on Sophia, who was sitting on the office sofa reading a book. Henry rubbed his temples.
Henry? What's wrong?
Nothing, I just want to be alone for a while. You should go home for today. Sorry.
Seeing his tired expression, Sophia didn't press further and left the office. She could feel it. Every time she touched him, his body would instinctively tense up. Could it be that even though his memory was impaired, his body still knew she wasn't the woman he loved? Was that why he was repulsed by her? Feeling uneasy, Sophia quickly took out her phone and called John.
Sophia? What's the matter?
Uncle, I need to talk to you urgently. Are you available?
Of course, I'm available.
All right, I'll come to see you right away.
Sophia hung up and hurried out. Sophia emerged from John's place, her face still flushed. For the first time, she had set aside all her dignity for a man. She had never imagined proposing marriage herself. Days passed uneventfully. Emily's spirits deteriorated, and she grew thinner. Seeing her lack of energy pained Charles deeply. He had consulted Dr. Smith, but Dr. Smith said they couldn't cure her, they could only try to extend her life. If she cooperated actively, she could live for another 3 to 5 years. But as things stood, it seemed she had no will to live. In other words, even Dr. Smith couldn't save her if she didn't want to live.
Emily, I hope you won't avoid this. I'll ask you one more time. Will you marry me?
Emily mechanically turned her head to look at him. He was still young, with countless possibilities ahead of him. He shouldn't be tied to her.
I'm sorry, Charles. Forgive me, but I can't say yes.
Do you want to see him?
Why would I want to see him? Let's just leave it at that.
Charles looked at the scars on her exposed skin and closed his eyes.
I understand.
Then he would accompany her through the last part of her life.
Henry, Tone, surprised marriage? Didn't Sophia and I just get engaged not long ago?
John, Tone, serious, how much longer do you want to wait? Whether you want to or not, you have to marry her. Do you know? It was Miss White herself who brought up the marriage.
Henry remained silent.
John, Tone, angry speak.
Henry, Tone, resigned. Let's do as you wish, father.
John, Tone, relieved. Good, then I'll start making preparations.
Henry nodded and said no more. John and Sophia's parents quickly arranged the wedding, and within a few days, everything was nearly set.
John, Tone, cheerful, the wedding will be held next Saturday.
Henry, Tone, surprised so soon?
John, Tone, serious, Sophia suggested it herself, so naturally, we need to take it seriously.
Henry, Tone, resigned. All right.
John patted Henry's shoulder and left the room. Henry sat in his room, staring at the pristine wedding attire, feeling a mix of emotions. On the wedding day, it was a nationwide sensation, with many media outlets vying to report and broadcast the grand event. As Charles walked into the hospital, he overheard a group of nurses chatting and laughing.
Nurse 1, Tone. Excited, did you know? Today, the heirs of the two most famous companies in the country are getting married.
Nurse 2, Tone, cheerful, I know. It's the Han family and the Bai family. The heir of the Han family is super handsome. What's his name again? Henry.
These words made Charles stop in his tracks.
Charles, Tone, polite, excuse me, what were you talking about?
Nurse 1, Tone. Cheerful. Oh, Mr. Zhou, you must know about the Han and companies, right? Their heirs are getting married today.
Nurse 2, Tone, excited, look, it's being reported on TV right now.
Charles's mood darkened, but he still politely excused himself and headed towards Emily's room. When Charles opened the door, he saw that Emily was so weak that even the rise and fall of her chest were barely noticeable. Narrator, Tone, sad. Charles walked to her side, looking at her pale face, feeling a pang of pain in his heart.
Emily, Tone, weak. Charles, you don't have to come every day.
Charles, Tone, serious, Henry is getting married today.
Emily was stunned for a moment, then smiled.
Emily, Tone, resigned. That's good. They are well matched.
Charles, Tone, hopeful. If you don't want to smile, then don't. It's okay to cry. No one will know except me.
The next second, he saw Emily's eyes redden, and tears began to flow. Henry pressed his temples hard. It felt like something in his mind was trying to break free. John, taking a break from greeting guests, saw Henry standing there in a daze. He frowned and walked over.
John, Tone, serious, what are you thinking about? The wedding ceremony is about to start. Are you ready?
Henry looked at John's face, feeling an urge to leave the wedding scene. But in the end, he nodded. Half an hour later, the wedding began. Henry stood before the priest first. The feeling of something trying to break free in his mind grew stronger. Scenes from the past flashed through his mind like a movie, and the face of the woman in his memories became clearer. It wasn't Sophia's face. It was another face, gentle yet stubborn. They had been so happy together. Memories surged more intensely, overwhelming Henry, making his face even paler. Her eyes were filled with unresolvable sorrow and love. Everything she did was for him. His Emily.
Why did I let this happen?
Henry clenched his teeth, his eyes burning with anger and regret, as if a raging fire could consume everyone in the next second. Meanwhile, at the wedding.
Sophia, do you take this man beside you to be your lawfully wedded husband for richer or poorer?
I do.
The priest nodded and turned to Henry.
Henry, do you take this woman beside you to be your lawfully wedded wife?
I do not. The only woman I, Henry, will marry in this lifetime is Emily, not you, Sophia.
He remembered.
I'm sorry.
Henry nodded at her. I have to go find my Emily. Henry then walked over to a reporter and stopped.
Is this live?
The reporter instinctively nodded.
Emily, I'm sorry. I'm coming to find you.
With that, he hurried away. At the airport, Henry sat in the car, anxiously waiting for news from his subordinates. But there was no response for a long time. Unable to wait any longer, he dialed his subordinate's number.
Can't you even find a person?
Sorry, sir. It seems Mr. Charles took Miss Emily abroad. We're still trying to determine which country they went to.
Henry could hear the frantic typing on the other end. Henry fell silent, lowered his eyes, and hung up the phone. He was anxious but helpless. Charles was feeding Emily water. Watching her obediently take sips, his feelings grew more complicated. Lost in thought, Charles didn't even realize the cup was empty.
Charles, what are you thinking about?
Charles snapped back to reality and set the cup aside.
Nothing.
Even Charles has something on his mind.
Charles's hands trembled as he took out his phone.
Emily, there's something I want to show you.
A video? What is it?
Charles didn't know how to explain, so he just played the video.
You'll understand when you see it.
The video began with the priest asking Sophia if she would marry Henry. Then the priest asked Henry the same question. Although she knew the outcome, Emily still held her breath, waiting for his answer.
I do not.
What was going on? Why would he refuse? It wasn't until Henry looked into the camera and said,
Emily, I'm sorry. I'm coming to find you.
that she snapped back to reality.
He's coming to find you. He knows everything now, so let him be with you.
I don't want him with me.
Why?
Look at me now.
If you love each other, what is there to worry about?
With those words, he left the room. Emily sat on the bed, lost in thought. Charles leaned against the wall, closed his eyes briefly, and then took out his phone to send a text. Shortly after, he received a string of numbers. Charles dialed the number and slowly walked away from the hospital room.
This is Charles.
Emily's heart had been racing ever since Charles left the room. So much time had passed, why hadn't he come back yet? Just as she was puzzling over it, the door to the room suddenly opened.
Char!
The next second, her eyes widened in shock at the person who entered. Henry stared intently at Emily, his heart aching with every beat as he took in her pale and gaunt appearance.
Don't come any closer!
Emily snapped back to reality and tried to get out of bed to escape.
Emily, I won't hurt you.
Henry's heart ached even more as he took a few steps forward, blocking her path.
Go back! This isn't where you should be.
Emily, realizing she couldn't escape, grabbed the blanket to shield herself.
By your side is exactly where I should be.
Seeing her reaction, Henry understood her concerns.
No matter what, to me, you are just Emily.
Emily was taken aback.
I saw everything when I came in.
With a slight force, the blanket fell away. He reached out and embraced her.
I'm sorry, Emily. I realized it too late.
Henry stayed by Emily's side, never leaving her, even working from her room. During his absence, significant changes had occurred in the Han Corporation. John had a change of heart and voluntarily stepped down, making Henry the rightful head of the Han Corporation. Sophia sent him a long text, expressing that she had genuinely fallen in love with him during their time together and was willing to wait for him if possible. Henry firmly rejected her and then blocked her number. Henry had also asked John about a way to neutralize the toxin, but John said that the person who administered the toxin never provided a cure and had disappeared without leaving any contact information. They would have to find the solution themselves.
Where there is poison, there must be an antidote.
He believed this firmly. With her heart reconciled with Henry, Emily found a renewed will to live and actively cooperated with her treatment.